For days we've been waiting to see whether Bradley Manning was going to testify, and its testimony about the conditions he was held in, really for almost 2 years, but certainly the part in Kuwait and Quantico. And we didn't have it. We've seen him in the courtroom, but we didn't see him ever take the stand. So we're sitting in this small courtroom. There's all these guys in these formal dress blue uniforms. I mean, they look like those Custers or Civil Wars with those little things on their shoulders, epaulets. And then all of a sudden we come back from lunch, and David Coombs, Bradley's lawyer, says Bradley Manning will come to the stand. And you could have heard, I mean, the room was just mesmerized by what was going to happen next. And he says to Bradley, I know you may be a little nervous about this. I'll ease you into it. When Bradley opened his mouth, he was not nervous. I mean, the testimony was incredibly moving, emotional roller coaster for all of us, but particularly obviously for Bradley and what he went through. But it was so horrible what happened to him over a 2-year period. But he described it in great detail, in a way that was articulate, smart, self-aware. I mean, he knew what was going on. He tried to make it so that they wouldn't keep him on this suicide risk. They wouldn't keep him on preventive injury status where he didn't have clothes and all of that. And he couldn't do it. And he kept trying it, and they kept lying to him. And it was really dramatic. What came out, what it began with, was really his arrest in late May of 2010. He was almost immediately taken to Kuwait. And that's where they got him in a way that really, for a period of time, almost destroyed him. They put him into cages that he described as 8 by 8 by 8. There were 2 cages. He said they were like animal cages. They were in a tent alone, just these 2 cages side by side. One of them had whatever possessions he may have had. One of them he was in with a little bed for a rack and a toilet, dark, in this cage for almost 2 months. He was taken out for a short while and then without explanation put back in the cage, meals in the cage, etc., all of that. And then wait until you hear this. They would wake him at night at 11 p.m., 10 or 11, and his day or night was all night, and he was allowed to go back to sleep at 12 o'clock. Or 1 o'clock noon the next day. So when we think about what happened to people at Guantanamo or sensory deprivation or what McCoy says in his books on torture, what are they trying to do except destroy this human being? And he said, for me, I stopped keeping track. I didn't know whether night was day or day was night. And my world became very, very small. It became these cages. And I'm a person, he said, this was really, I thought all of us really were interested in that. He said, I'm someone who likes current events. I take a broader view of the world. And he gave an example of the oil spill in the Gulf, and he said, you know, when that ended, and he said, my world all of a sudden was totally confined to these cages. And that was almost 2 months in Kuwait, something that none of us really knew about for this period. And he went on to talk about then what happens when he went to
Michael, you're describing a person who is the exact opposite of some of the portraits of him that have come out from some supposed supporters of his, but also people who have had grudges against him of being an emotionally unstable person. Why the sense that you got of how intelligent and how clear he was about what was happening to him?
Even one of the psychiatrists who testified, and who was one of the psychiatrists who said this guy should never have been put on prevention of injury or suicide risk when he was at Quantico, that was right after Kuwait, said he's highly intelligent. And you could see that. And the image was just as you're saying, Juan, was the opposite of what I would have thought going in there, of this person who couldn't make their way in the world, of who just, you know, was unable to really function. This person was articulate, strong, self-aware, as I said, and and very sympathetic. I mean, very sympathetic, and not even a shade that he shaded anything, not anything close to, you know, mendacity, lies, nothing. This was incredible testimony.
The psychiatrist who treated Bradley Manning while he was in prison at Quantico Marine Brig testified on Wednesday that commanders there consistently ignored his medical advice and continued to impose harsh restrictions on Bradley Manning, even though he posed no risk of suicide. Captain William Hochter said he treated prisoners at Guantanamo but had never encountered military officials so unwilling to heed his medical advice. He testified and said, I had been a senior medical officer for 24 years at the time. I'd never experienced anything like this. It was clear to me they had made up their mind on a certain cause of action, and my recommendations had no impact, he said. Michael Ratner.
Yesterday when I was in court, they put another psychiatrist on, the defense did, Ricky Malone, who'd been head of a very substantial psychiatrist, head of Walter Reed at some point in forensic psychology, and he said essentially the same thing. He said, I went in there, I treated Bradley Manning, I gave him, a sleep medication when he needed sleep, and I went to the person who ran that brig, and I kept saying he does not have to be on POI, that's short for preventive injury. He doesn't have to be on suicide risk watch.
And explain what that means when he's put on those.
Right, I'm glad you asked that, because this was so dramatic. They showed a video at some point at the trial of where Bradley Manning was kept, and he's kept. There's no natural light. If he presses his face to the screen, it's not really bars. It's like a square screen. He could see the reflection of light on the floor at the end of the hall. Immediately across from his cell is the observation booth that looks right into him. So even if he goes to the bathroom and sits on the toilet, they see everything he does. There's a bright light on him. Again, sensory stuff. You look at that 24 hours a day. They show in the video when they actually, something happens where they decide they're going to put him, he's always on POI, but they're going to put him back on suicide risk. And they showed the video it's videoed of him passing his clothes through the mail, through the little hatch out of the prison. And then
like a mail slot.
Like a mail slot. And that night, he's standing there stark naked. They only show you the top, but he's standing there stark naked in front of these really beefy, big Marines in camouflage. That's the scene you see. And then there's another video showing, he's trying to ask, why am I here? What did I do wrong? And they're lying to him. One of them who's playing like Mutt and Jeff, he's saying, well, you're a great, if I had 100 defendants like you, or prisoners like you, it would be, I would be great. They're lying to him all the time. And what comes out, because as that clip you read, Amy, of the psychiatrist, is that it never happens, really never happens, that the head of a brig disregards psychiatric information like they were given about Bradley Manning. And here they did. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, where was that order coming from? We know there was a 3-star general involved. How much did it go up to the Pentagon?
Who was the 3-star general?
I don't remember.
And this is, of course, all under President Obama.
Right, that's correct. I mean, and that cell, when he's in that cell, when we talk about the light on, when he sleeps on that little bunk, and he has to face the light so they can observe him. If he turns over to avoid the light, they come in and they wake him up. That's night. Day, what happens during the day? He's in that cell 23 and a half hours a day, maybe 20 minutes of what they call sunshine exercise, which is just nothing. And what can he do? Because he's on duty, supposedly, he has to either stand or he can sit on that metal bunk with his feet on the ground and can't lean against anything. That's 10 or 15 hours a day of what you have to call sensory deprivation.
And Mike, I'd like to ask you about, given that he's been under these conditions now for 2.5 years, it's not surprising that he would be attempting to try to negotiate some kind of a plea deal on a reduced sentence. Could you talk about that aspect of what happened with the court? Let me back up on that for 1 second, because he was in Kuwait till end of July 2010. He then was taken to Quantico till April or so of 2011. That's the 9 months that this hearing is really about, and whether the charges should be dismissed because of the serious misconduct and torture and cruel treatment by the government. So then he was taken to Leavenworth, and just as an illustration of how he did not have to be treated like he was treated at Quantico, they put on the head of Leavenworth brig by telephone yesterday. And she said, well, as soon as he got here, he went right into medium security. And that's the best you can do when you're pre-trial. Then you mix with the population, you get all your hygiene items. There's a scene in this, and he talks, where he has to actually beg for a piece of toilet paper. He has to stand in front at Quantico, stand there with no shirt on, with his boxers, and said, whatever, Corporal something, this is Corporal Manning, or Private First Class Manning, can I have a piece of toilet paper? And he has to stand there at attention while he's begging for a piece of toilet paper. Your question, Lon. What the lawyer has said, David Coombs, the lawyer for Bradley Manning, has said, they are trying to force
Bradley Manning into testifying, if he knows anything, which we, probably falsely because we don't think there's anything there, but against my client, Julian Assange. They are trying to break Bradley Manning. What's remarkable is that he still has this incredible dignity after going through this.